South Africa faces mounting pressure from the Trump administration to withdraw its case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. But is this likely to happen as the pressure intensifies? Joining us in the studio to discuss this is Ray Hartley from the Brenthurst Foundation. What do you think? Is there any chance that South Africa can drop this case?
I'm not sure there is, because they've committed themselves so stridently in the public domain to it. But there is always, never say never in politics. And this, this delay that's been imposed, the 6 months that have been given for the case to be sort of put on hold, is an opportunity for South Africa to reset. And there are many ways in which they could do that. They could, for example, say that they're going to review their entire approach to all countries that are involved in human rights and other abuses, so that they have a consistent policy. It would give them a way out to put it back into the political domain for discussion. But I think it's pretty unlikely, because they have committed themselves heavily.
Tell us more about this basket of countries that they could, say, okay, we're going to be consistent. So this would include Russia.
Yeah, it would include, I think, more in Africa. I think Sudan, for example, where there's a massive genocide. Everybody agrees there's a genocide happening, with the rapid response forces that are killing tens of thousands of people in the south. And, that would be an obvious case for them to say, well, let's look at other situations and make sure that we're being consistent. And yeah, I think elsewhere, Ukraine and so on, they could also do that. But I think there are many other ways in which they could send a signal. They've got Mcebisi Jonas now appointed as the envoy. Now, I know there's been a big kerfuffle about what he said about Trump in the past and so on, but I don't think that's really going to be a major factor. He's the kind of personality who could quite quickly convince them of his bona fides. And importantly, I think he has Cyril's ear. So, for example, there are things that could be done, like, much more low-cost things, like reopening some kind of diplomatic relationship. Reopening the embassy in Tel Aviv. There wouldn't really be a political cost for that. Egypt has an embassy in Tel Aviv. Russia has an embassy in Tel Aviv. China has an embassy in Tel Aviv. We're the only country that doesn't. So that kind of move, just to signal that there's a kind of more considered approach being taken. And similarly, to invite Israel to have an ambassador back in Pretoria. That would be a pretty low-cost way of sending a signal that South Africa is moving in the right direction with the US.
So South Africa currently does not have an embassy in Tel Aviv, and there's no ambassador in Pretoria.
Yeah, so we closed down our embassy in Tel Aviv and withdrew our staff, protest at what was happening in Gaza. And then we passed a motion in Parliament basically shutting down the Israeli diplomatic representation here. And Israel preempted the implementation of that by withdrawing their ambassador. So it's quite an interesting situation, because they withdrew the ambassador, so they can quite easily rescind that, and we'd be back to where we were, because no formal expulsion really took place from South Africa. So it would be easy to do these things and send the right signal.
Ramaphosa, or if you look at Lamola, do you think they have it in them to do that?
Yeah, I think Lamola clearly was appointed to replace Pandor, because she was pretty hard line on this issue, and he was more moderate. But I think he's trapped in a political organization that's all over the place, chaotic. The ANC doesn't know where its votes are going to come from in the future. It's desperate. This is seen as one of the populist issues that it can use to try and salvage some kind of credibility with voters, although it didn't really factor in the last election at all. So there's policy chaos there. I don't think there's a coherent approach. Ramaphosa himself has clearly shown that he would like to moderate the approach. For example, there was the intention to rename Santon Drive, Leila Khalid Drive, after the Palestinian hijacker. And the significance of that, of course, is that the US has a major consulate on Santon Drive and would now be on Leila Khalid Drive. And, that would be an obvious smack in the face. And he's asked the mayor of Johannesburg to reconsider this decision. But I think the trouble is the weakness with which he approaches these issues. He shouldn't have said, we'd like the mayor to rethink it. He should have picked up the phone and called the mayor and said, like, by this afternoon, I'd like you to announce that you're not doing that. These things have to be slightly more aggressively pursued if they're going to happen. So right now, we don't know if Santon Drive is being renamed or not. It's gone into that great ether where no decision is taken. And there's a lot of that around the Ramaphosa administration.
Well, can we discuss Jonas a little bit more? So you think he's a good choice, but he's going to start every conversation on the back foot, explaining that, is that the way to approach the US?
Yeah, I think that, the alternative is that you send somebody there who has never been critical of Trump, but doesn't have the support and the ear of the South African government. Well, what does that achieve? I think it's probably better that that's on the table at the beginning. And I think Jonas is sophisticated enough to deal with that, to make light of it or say, I regret saying that and all that kind of thing. He's not the kind of personality who's going to go to the trenches over something he said several years ago in the different Trump administration. So he's probably, from that point of view, and I think what's more important is what he puts on the table. If he puts on the table stuff that's consistent with that view, then it's going to turn out badly. But if he goes there with some kind of offering, with some kind of movement, maybe on some of these issues that I've been talking about, that will quickly erase that past statement, I think.
Names of Afrikaners are now being put forward. Rolf Meyer, whom we both know fairly well. Do you think that's a solution as an ambassador to the US?
Well, I think that would be an excellent solution, actually. I think somebody like Rolf Meyer, who really does have, again, has the ear of Ramaphosa, and so can pick up the phone, probably at midnight because of the time zones, and talk to the president if he needs to, is quite a good idea, and I think he has credibility. So I think that would be an exceptionally smart move. As to whether or not Rolf is willing to make that kind of gamble with his political career, I'm not sure. I think, again, he would only do it if he knew that he was going to be representing some kind of policy shift of some kind. I don't think he would want to go in there defending South Africa's relationship with Iran, for example. That's not going to work with him. I think he would want to go in there saying that, we've come to try and improve things and here's what we're going to do, and have some ideas, again, along the lines of what could be accommodated at little political cost to move forward. So I think it's a very good idea myself.
And the new US ambassador coming to South Africa, that's quite contentious.
Yeah, it looks like we're going to have a proper real MAGA hardliner coming to South Africa. And again, how we deal with that and how we deal with him, I think is vitally important, It's not going to be useful if we're going to try and provoke him into being his very most MAGA self from the moment he arrives. And there'll be lots of populist voices wanting to do that. I think it's much better for us to, again, try and present him with some way forward that we can go with the relationship, however difficult that might be. Yeah, I think it's going to be tough, this diplomatic relationship going forward. It's not going to be easy, but we can make it harder on ourselves or easier. And we've just got to be very strategic about it.
Do you have any suggestions of who South Africa, if it would agree to reopen the embassy in Tel Aviv, who would be a good candidate?
I mean, you've got to look for some independent voices in foreign policy. There are some, like Obed Papela, for example. He got into hot water. He's quite a senior leader in the ANC. He got into hot water because he wanted to reestablish proper relations with Morocco, and that went against a whole lot of ANC, policy. He's an independent guy. He might be the kind of person that you could send there that would not, become a thorn in the flesh of the relationship.
But this is all tricky in South Africa at the moment. We've seen what the tariffs has done to South Africa's economic growth prospects. So this is really hurting South Africa, this fractious relationship that they have with both Israel and the US.
Yeah, I think it definitely does. I think that our exports to the US, especially manufacturing exports, automotive, and some agriculture, although agricultural exports are not a massive part of our global agricultural exports, but they're part of it. There's definite damage that's being done there. And that can be, to some extent, mitigated by opening new markets. The Agriculture Minister Steenhuisen was a couple of months ago in China signing trade deals, and we're hoping to expand our exports to China, for example. So there are these places where we can go. But the damage is pretty bad because we already have anemic economic growth here, and now it's likely to be under 1%, which for a developing economy like ours, with a major unemployment problem, is pretty serious.
Well, Ray Hartley from the Brenthurst Foundation, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thank you.